Hmm. 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 Oh! Hello, traveller. I'm afraid you found me in a spot of bother. Only a moment ago, I was being chased by the ball in that blasted fortress. But I must have taken a wrong turn, because now I'm here, and I'm not sure where here is. I tried to find someone who could help me, but when I went to knock on this door, I found it jammed shut. Now, who would do that, eh? Hmm, makes you wonder what's behind this door. Ho ho ho. I suppose I'll wait here until something happens. I have to use my head and think.
Something's been bothering me ever since Elden Ring came out. Ever since I first arrived at Leyndell. This magnificent city of gold, the centre of Erdtree society, and the culmination of so many questlines, has been picked apart and analysed to the point that not a single misplaced cobblestone, random box, or misaligned statue cannot be explained. And yet, there is one mystery that is so strange and hidden in plain sight that I am baffled I've never seen anyone explore it beyond a cursory glance. Why are all the doors in Leyndell sealed up? There are so many small details in From Software games that go unexplained for ages, only for later revelations to completely transform our understanding of what happened, lending new context to something we took for granted. Remember when Mog beat the allegations? This is what I've been expecting to hear about these strange sealed doors for over 4 years now, because surely I'm not the only one who's perplexed by this. Over half of the buildings in the capital have this gold stuff around the door and window frames, while other buildings are entirely untouched. So the question is, why? What happened? Why some and not all? I mean, this is the most important place in the lands between, the nexus of everything. And yet when I have asked people about the doors in the past, the best I can get is a shrug. But I'm not going to stand for this, so it's time to take matters into my own hands. Oh, ew. I didn't mean literally. Well, now I'm really invested in getting to the bottom of this. The what is the easiest thing for us to work out, because there are physical clues. At first glance, it looks like gold, but getting a closer look you can see it's slightly translucent, with a swirly texture that looks more like liquid. Even in the City of Gold, they don't use gold to seal their doors. Plus, I wouldn't be able to put my hand in it like this. So, if gold won't cut it, we need another explanation. If you look up Leyndell sealed doors, one of the first results is this Reddit thread, where the top comment states the doors are sealed with corpse wax. Ugh. Oh no. Yeah. Allegedly the stuff around the doors is made up of the decayed flesh of dead people. And if that sounds suitably grimdark Elden Ring, well, it's actually a real thing. Adipocere, also known as corpse wax or the fat of graveyards, is a product of decomposition that turns body fat into a soap-like substance. Corpse wax forms through a process called saponification, and tends to develop when body fat is exposed to anaerobic bacteria in a warm, damp, alkaline environment, either in soil or water. Corpse wax has a long history with Leyndell. The many gargoyles protecting the sacred capital have been patched up countless times with corpse wax, and whether they are metaphorically or literally infused with the power of these fallen champions, they remain some of Leyndell's staunchest defenders. The Ash of War corpse wax cutter is attached to the gargoyle Blackblade, and we can see remains of the wax dripping down gargoyle weapons, so it's certainly a material that is used regularly. It also burns relatively well, so could be melted into shape to be applied to the seams of doors and windows. Given the capital's war-torn history, it should be quite easy to find it in the decomposing corpses around the surrounding battlefields, with plenty full of lovely, mulchy, dead body juice. One other popular comment that intrigued me suggested that the wax might not be applied from the outside, but rather a result of stuffing mountains of corpses into buildings and the resulting soap leaking out of the gaps. But without much to go on, this is just flavourful speculation. Whilst we wrote off gold earlier, the gargoyles do remind me of something that From Software could be drawing from. The art of kintsugi is a Japanese practice that uses metals like gold and silver to repair broken crockery, creating this very striking visual of kitchenware veined in precious metal. The idea here is that broken things can still be reused, with the scars preserved as a proud part of their history. The bodies of the dead repair the gargoyles in much the same way, and they can be rebuilt time and again to defend the city. Now, if you're wondering how sealed doors could possibly relate to kintsugi, don't worry, we'll get back to that later. However, this is all a little bit too convenient. The corpse wax explanation isn't without problems. I mean, if we just look back at the gargoyles and the doors, there's an obvious mismatch here. The colour is all wrong. The wax used by the gargoyles is beige or black in colour, whereas these doors are more like a honey yellow. And this is when, after scrolling for quite a long way, I found a little comment buried very deep in the thread. It's not corpse wax, despite community lore consensus. In the files, this texture is labelled tree sap. The corpse wax thing is cool, but it's not backed up by anything in game. This isn't the first time the Souls community has run into the problem of one person putting a convincing theory forward, it turning out to be wrong, but everyone has already accepted it as gospel. But, I mean, it makes sense for sure. This isn't the only place you'll see people calling it wax. Even Tarnished Archaeologist calls it that.
And perhaps most curiously of all, yellow wax seals the doorways and windows of the houses of the capital.
This isn't a jab at anyone either. It's so hard to know every single tiny detail, and it's very convenient to be able to take a lot of things at face value, otherwise we'd be investigating absolutely everything and we'd never get anything done. But in this case, the distinction matters a lot. It would be unfair then to just take the tree sap comment at face value as another unsourced, solitary comment. So, I decided to do a bit of my own digging. Honestly, anything for this to not be corpse wax right now? I'm a bit of a noob at unpacking game files, so it took a little while to find the right places to look, and at first, I was not convinced. Alarm bells were going off when browsing the texture and model files. Instead of having nice, easy-to-read names, I was coming across stuff like AET_220_29A, which made me incredibly skeptical of this new lead, until a modder friend kindly pointed out that I was reading the names of archives, not the individual textures themselves. It didn't help that Smithbox has community notes that seemed to be attached to the wrong things either, but eventually, I found it. AEG220_366 and AEG220_367, archives for two of the most common examples of the golden door frames, and buried in a separate context menu, the name of their textures. Tree sap. This is actually quite unusual as far as I can tell. Most textures have very generic sounding or nondescript names, making the tree sap designation feel very specific. Like From Software wanted players to data mine this information, but most of them missed it completely for a totally different and seemingly plausible explanation. The thing about tree sap is it can also do a lot of what corpse wax does. It's a good sealant, it hardens over time, it's naturally antiseptic and even fairly nutritious. It even tastes kinda good. So, now that we have a definitive answer about the what of what it is, we need to get to why. What would compel the most powerful city in the lands between to seal half of its doors? The keen-eyed among you have probably seen it, but it's surprisingly easy to ignore the ash piles around Leyndell, even before we burn the Erd tree. It's a seemingly incidental detail given that the capital is already in a semi-ruined state, with a giant dragon embedded into the central wall. But the ash isn't a product of crumbling stone. Something has burned and blanketed the city in ash before, so much that we can find piles of it scattered all around the city. Buildings are covered in huge mounds of it, the streets are still littered with piles of it, and even an entire walled off section is still blanketed with ash. Clearly, ash has been a problem in Leyndell before, and one of the more popular theories about the doors is that they were sealed to keep ash out. Ash is quite light and easily breaks down into tiny dust particles, so it would be able to seep into buildings through windows and doors with relative ease if there was enough of it.
These last two paint a very specific picture. Ash has accumulated on the ground all throughout the capital, so much so that its citizens have taken to sealing their doors to prevent the ash from entering their dwellings.
Naturally, you'd want some kind of seal to stop this from happening, and there are even a couple of historical parallels we can draw from. The American Dust Bowl of the 1930s saw vast swathes of the US and Canadian countryside turned into infertile, raging dust plains brought on by a combination of overfarming and really bad weather. The images really speak for themselves here. It was an ecological disaster that hasn't been seen in America since, and it honestly looks like hell. Keeping dust out of the house was a constant battle, and people hit by the dust storms would use things like wet cloths to line windows, adhesive tape, and allegedly even mud and wax to help seal any gaps that the dust might make its way through. However, as I research this topic, mentions of waxy sealants often come up anecdotally, but I have yet to find a comprehensive source that isn't just hearsay. So, as much as I'd love to definitively say that things similar to tree sap were used in the Dust Bowl, the parallels aren't so clear-cut. There is another historical event that I think has merit that we can compare to, and it's the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD. The Roman towns of Pompeii and Herculaneum have become two of the most important sources for life in ancient Rome, and none of that would have been possible were it not for the enormous volcanic eruption that submerged the city in a thick layer of volcanic debris. This is of course very similar to what we see happen to Leyndell after the Erd Tree burns, with only the tallest spires poking out of the ash piles. There are also signs of burning in Leyndell from a past event, one that could have coincided with the very ash storms we see historical evidence for. In fact, a lot of Leyndell shows signs of some kind of level of damage, with lower Leyndell covered in corpses and, curiously, these petrified people we can find standing around upper Leyndell. These are not NPCs like the other catatonic nobles who attack us. They are frozen in place, and it's because of them I'm reminded of Pompeii's most famous leftovers, the flash-fried bodies of people caught in pyroclastic flows, their three-dimensional image rendered forever by calcified layers of ash. It's not an easy parallel though either. Pompeii was a volcanic event, and we can't draw a link to what happened in Leyndell's past because, well, quite simply, we don't know what caused it. The petrified citizens of Leyndell are only a surface level connection, because many still have clothing and jewellery, which would have been obliterated had they been caught in a pyroclastic flow, as would a lot of the city, and it shows no signs of being engulfed by anything of that force. Of course, it could have been rebuilt since then, but then why would the bodies and ash still be present? So, what did cause this prior ash storm that would have necessitated people sealing up their doors and windows? As I see it, there are two possibilities. We're going to immediately discount Mount Gelmir erupting because the ash fall is entirely localised to Leyndell. So the first thing to point at is the obvious elephant in the room. Elephantigon, elephant dragon, whatever. Big dragon. Dragons do fire. It is known. Fire produces burning, and burning makes ash. Leyndell was famously sacked in a war against the dragons, before Godwyn the Golden brokered a peace between Erdtree society and the dragon faction. And ever since, the body of Grand Saxe has sat embedded in the architecture of the city. Grandsax was probably not the only dragon to attack Leyndell, and the sheer destruction that would have been wrought is difficult to imagine, mainly because Leyndell's appearance raises so many questions about how this would have gone down. We know a lot of the city is covered in ash, but the source of the ash is a bit of a mystery. The walled-off far side of the city has a collection of burned out and destroyed buildings, but not anything that satisfyingly represents the full extent of the dragon attack, which leads me to believe the city was in part levelled and rebuilt, with that particular section being abandoned, as the timeline for the war against the dragons is unknowable, and whether Leyndell was rebuilt is impossible to say for sure, but the architecture in the city is very uniform, suggesting a wide-scale, simultaneous building program could have taken place at some time. In these circumstances, the raging firestorms would have caused ash to fall in a way that would spur residents of surviving buildings to seal up their windows, but again, the timeline doesn't make sense. If we're considering that Leyndell was rebuilt, then why would the ash protection measures be in place at all on new buildings that were only built because of the attack? And if we aren't considering the city to be rebuilt, then again, why would these ash measures still be in place? The war against the dragons occurred pre-shattering, while Godwyn was very much alive, and the dragons were still a relevant force, which places it probably quite a long way back in the timeline. The ash is still a problem, but not one that probably necessitates sealing buildings for hundreds, possibly thousands of years. The last explanation for all the ash is a little more speculative, and it's an idea that I have seen floated mostly by Tarnished Archaeologist. He posits in his video, The Secrets of the Erd Tree's First Burn, that we, the Tarnished, are burning the Erd Tree for a second time, and that it has been burned at least once before. After all, the tree that we can see is an illusion, with only the very base of the tree being the physical form that we can see in the flesh, or the wood, I suppose? He points to both the ash piles in Leyndell and Melena's purpose to burn the Erd Tree as evidence for this theory. Melina herself says she is burned and bodiless, and we can see burn marks on her arms that would line up very nicely with her having burnt her real body in the past. It is her objective to burn the Erd Tree, after all. We also know for a fact that the Erd Tree burning buries Leyndell in ash, as we arrive there during the Ashfall to mend the Elden Ring, so it burning before is seemingly the best explanation for this ash, right? It could also explain the burnt ruins we find. If the tree was physical before, as we have little reason to doubt, enormous burning debris would be falling all across the city. One large branch landing in a suburb of Leyndell would ignite a firestorm that would feasibly destroy that part of the city. It's also easier to place the first burning of the Erd Tree closer to the present day than the war with the dragons, as we have no fixed time for when it must have happened. It could have taken place as recently as the Shattering, but no sooner, as the story trailer shows an illusory Erd Tree during the Siege of Leyndell. Still, it's plausible that a first burning explains the sealed doors a little easier if they were sealed up to keep the resulting ashfall out. If. Because there's one massive problem. Tree sap is flammable. Yeah, turns out that tree sap is actually a very good fire starter, so much so that a lot of campers and survivalists will use it in a forest to get a fire going. In the wake of an enormous fire, even one that might be dying down, I wouldn't be covering my windows and doors in the natural equivalent of kerosene to keep the dust out. I'd be using literally anything else. It's not the only problem. There's also the issue of where it came from. This is a lot of sap, especially for a tree that doesn't produce it anymore. The theory that the yellow sap seals were used to keep ash out also falls apart when we notice that several buildings buried in ash do not have any kind of seal, which all but confirms to me that this is not a dust-catching measure, especially as many of these buildings without protection are higher up. closer to Marika's palace, and thus feasibly would be protected if Ash were the problem. See, what I've been conveniently dancing around up until now is that the only time golden sap was available in this quantity seems to be during the Age of Plenty, a time that we know is long gone from the Blessed Dew talisman. It was once thought that the blessed sap of the Erd Tree would drip from its boughs forever, but that Age of Plenty swiftly came to a close, and with time, the Erd Tree became more an object of faith. I'm no expert in logistics, but it seems unlikely you'd be able to muster mountains of beautiful golden tree sap to line your windows if your singular source of sap has been dry for potentially ages. But it gets worse because tree sap hardens into amber, so if you line your doors with that stuff, well, guess what, bozo? You've just made your house a tomb. You ain't getting out. So, we've got ecological disasters producing mountains of ash, people sealing themselves up in houses they can't escape from, with materials they could never have sourced, and timelines that don't add up. It's this point in the video where it should hit you that I've been dangling a red herring in front of you the whole time with the ash sealing idea, because, as I've just demonstrated, it's 99% nonsense. Yet, it is also the single most prevailing theory, to the point that very few people have bothered to investigate it. But it makes no sense, which unfortunately brings us back to square one. Why are the doors in Leyndell sealed up? I think it's time to flip our perspective on the problem. I've been presenting theories that suggest the doors were sealed from within, but what if the doors were actually sealed from the outside? This is sort of the opinion I've had about the doors ever since I first saw them. The oozing sap looks more to me like it's been applied from the outside rather than the inside, and I always wondered why so many buildings would have been blocked off like this. But to understand why, we need to broaden our scope and really look at the state of the city. Leyndell, as it is presented to us on first arrival, is almost as much of a mirage as the Erd Tree. We are shown a city alive with trumpeting little bobbleheads, full of grand buildings and gleaming knights, but it could not be further from the reality. It is a broken, mostly abandoned ghost town, its population mysteriously absent, carts upturned littering the roads, vacant soldiers staring into the void on long-forgotten patrols, mounds of desecrated bodies covering the lower levels, ash piles and rubble strewn about, and a whole underbelly of grasping hands, rabid albinorics, and a forsaken society of omen lurking in the sewers. Ironically, Leyndell is in many ways the crucible coming back to haunt the Golden Order, a nexus point of every foe it has made, and every sin it has committed, waiting to pounce on its demise. There are many things that the Golden Order would rather keep out of the city, but the resources and mental acuity of its guardians are both clearly waning, leading to the lower levels to be devoid of any semblance of order. Perhaps it is this state of dereliction that has led many of the buildings to be sealed up. I live in the UK. I know. Contain your shock. I haven't been stabbed yet. But an all too common sight round here in certain more deprived parts of the country are boarded up houses. Abandoned structures are a liability for any society. They invite all sorts of things that local authorities hate, like squatters, drug users, and the buildings themselves don't receive maintenance, leading them to become quite dangerous. But what could be so bad that the Golden Order would go around sealing so many seemingly fine buildings up, when more ruined ones remain open? A lot of terrifying things have risen in the shadow of the shattering, and one of those very close to home is death. When Marika sealed away the Rune of Death, she caused so many of the problems we see in the present day. The listlessness of people living undead lives that should have ended centuries ago, the slow decay of the land, and inadvertently the Night of the Black Knives. Those who live in death have become a growing force across the lands ever since, a corruption of life's cycle that began with Godwyn's murder. And where do we find his body? Below Leyndell. His physical form has spread across the lands between through networks of tree roots, emerging below Stormvale and implanted into wildlife. I've covered the topic of mycelium networks in my Night Rain video, and although the theory I put forward in that video is now outdated, From Software have a distinct fascination with mycelium tree networks in Elden Ring. For those who don't know, trees in our real world are connected by mycelium fungus below ground that lets trees communicate and share resources across vast distances, which is exactly what we see Godwyn's body doing in Elden Ring. So it's entirely feasible that as death spreads, cases of those who live in death became more common in Leyndell, and measures were taken to seal off buildings where the dead are found to be, or to preemptively seal buildings that could become a hotbed for them. The dwindling number of guards can only be in so many places at once, so it does make sense to keep the problem under control with some pretty extreme methods before abandoning the lower quarter. Now, this theory is okay, and it definitely has a place, but it doesn't explain the extent of Leyndell's sealed buildings completely. Godwyn's influence is spreading around the lands, yet we only see these measures in Leyndell, which isn't exactly overrun by death. There are usually more signs of those who live in death in a place infested by it, and given the sewers below the city are closer to Godwyn's body and seem to be untouched by those who live in death, it isn't a case of simple proximity to Godwyn's body that's causing this. We do know that some of the dead are in the lower levels, but their presence feels a bit more like a byproduct of something else, rather than the cause. So, if not those who live in death, what could be so terrifying, so offensive, so blasphemous, that the Golden Order would be willing to seal it away forever?
Have you ever felt the curse? With your whole being, the pox upon life itself, feared and despised by all. The reviled blessing.
Those who live in death may be an unintended byproduct of Marika's vision, but the Dung Eater is a full-blown corruption of it. Where the dead defy the cycle of life and death, the Dung Eater would hijack it, making everyone in the image of the reviled omen forever and ever. It's difficult to put into words just how scared the Golden Order is of the Dung Eater. He's basically like the opposite of everything it stands for, and words like loathsome don't really cut it.
Right, there's something I should probably tell you. You heard of the Dung Eater? He's a madman. Has it out for everyone. Curses them. Goes round in his rank armour and all. You see him though. Stay, well, away. I was in the same jail as him once, so I know firsthand. He's a god-forsaken monster. Not just some petty thug like me. He's a killer. Kills people. And curses the souls. Does all sort of shit to the corpses. To keep them cursed forever. I ain't seen nothing more disgusting in all my years. I ain't ever been more scared neither. Rooted to the bloody spot while he did that to my friend.
I believe the reason that so many buildings in Leyndell are sealed up with tree sap is a result of what the Dung Eater has been doing, and I hope that by the end of the video you can see it that way too. The Seedbed Curse is the Dung Eater's calling card, and the places we find them tell us a lot about who he is out to curse. We can find one in Volcano Manor, a site for disgraced nobles. There are 2 Seedbed Curses in the Halig Tree, Miquella's side quest to fix the Golden Order, so naturally a prime target for corruption, and lastly, 3 we can find around Leyndell that are most crucial to this explanation of the theory. One is inside the real Round Table hold, in what would appear to be Dung Eater's room. Another is inside the ruined dome, and regrettably, one can appear on Boggart's corpse outside the city. His focus is on places closely associated with royalty, but his approach about who is corrupted is indiscriminate. Everyone should feel the blessing. But hang on, none of these places are protected with tree sap barriers, so how come? I'm gonna have to stop you right there, sir, madam, they, them. This is a crime scene. Body found fresh this morning. Please move along. Nothing to see here. There's no sap lining the doors of these places because, quite simply, the bodies are new. They haven't been found yet. And annoyingly, we don't know how many times Dung Eater has done this in the past. Obviously, he's done enough nefarious things in the past to be hated by everyone, which leads me to believe he's been doing this around Leyndell before? Even if it's only happened a few times though, word spreads like wildfire, and Dung Eater is essentially Elden Ring's equivalent of a domestic terrorist. The Seedbed Curse is basically the Dung Eater's gift to anyone seeking Erd Tree burial, with cursed corpses returning to the Erd Tree, afflicting their entire lineage with the Omen Curse, hijacking the standard form of reproduction in the lands between. Now, think about how real-world authorities react to incidents of violence and terror. If a cursed body is found in a Leyndell building, it would be the Elden Ring equivalent of a biological weapon, and naturally, you would want to seal that away quickly. I'm not implying that every building sealed up with tree sap in this way is one that's been personally cursed by the Dung Eater. In fact, I don't think he's actually cursed all that many buildings. Rather, if a handful of seedbed curses were found in abandoned buildings, the local authorities would be highly incentivized to seal away all of the abandoned buildings in the area. Leyndell's population has seemingly vanished in the present day, and if you remember what I said about squatting earlier, there would be a lot of empty buildings in the city. As Morgoth, you wouldn't want the most dangerous terrorist of modern times using these buildings as a place to wreak biological warfare against the sacred process of rebirth. So, what choice are you left with other than to seal up a bunch of vulnerable structures?
Ah! Something's happened. A message. Patreon.com/5glassesofmilk. A veritable treasure trove of knowledge. I could join the Discord and ask someone about my quandary. A small bounty of souls should do the trick. Ah, payment declined. Well, I suppose I'll just have to keep waiting.
An historic parallel to this is the plague outbreak that swept across Europe in the 14th and 17th centuries, where we can observe some similar phenomena to what we see in Leyndell. Medicine was ill understood, with doctors resorting to barbaric bloodletting remedies as well as literally using dead animals to suck out the plague from victims, none of which worked. And several solutions involving some more natural medicines such as tree resins proved to be ineffective. Quarantine practices were in their infancy too, leading to the iconic imagery of plague doctors and painting red crosses on the doors of infected households. It is the latter of these that should ring some bells, as the sap-sealed doors could well be a callback to such methods. I have seen some unsourced claims that people were sealed into their houses with wax, and while there do seem to be plenty of examples of people being sealed inside their houses, and it's brutal, wax and sap don't appear in any records I can find. Most houses then were made of wood anyway, so a few nails should do the trick just fine. I am not suggesting that these buildings are all filled with corpses though, a thought that many Reddit commenters love to salivate over. No, I think Leyndell's population has suffered a death by 1,000 cuts, and there is zero evidence to suggest that all of these houses have been turned into charnel pits. It doesn't mean that there can't be some, but we're not dealing with a plague in the traditional sense. The spread of the Seedbed Curse is a targeted attack. This is what makes the two cursed corpses inside Leyndell's walls seem especially interesting. They are placed in prominent areas, one at the heart of the keep of the Old Order, and one directly within the light of the Erd Tree. These are not random to me, these are stunts. The Dung Eater wants the Golden Order to know what he's doing, so he leaves the bodies where they can be found. What use is terror in secret? In fact, the Broken Dome building is currently in use by the Order, as on the lower levels it is patrolled by perfumers and pages tending to the petrifying individuals. The implication is these bodies are fresh, the curse probably performed mere hours before we arrive. There are many ways that Dung Eater could slink about the city to spread the curse. The guards are pretty lax with their patrols, and the streets are completely deserted, while his physical body bashes its own head inside a jail cell under Leyndell. He is perfectly capable of projecting a red phantom, wits intact, anywhere he needs to be. In fact, it is implied that Dung Eater maybe locked himself up in the cell to better spread the curse, so his physical form can be in the right place, out of harm's way, while he is free to act with impunity. But why the sewers? Well, they give good access to the city above. He's quite close to the action, but more importantly, he's with his people. Dung Eater is not an omen, but he considers himself one in an almost dysphoric way. His armour resembles their horned bodies, and the lack of any viewports or gaps to see the human beneath lets him cast doubt about his own nature. LARPing as an omen gives him a sense of security, but it is a fragile one at that, so he spreads the curse, so that others can be what he can never be. We can access the sewers in two ways, either through the Golden Grate after the city's covered in ash, or through the well in the lower city, and presumably this is how Dung Eater has got around in the past. The entrance is especially intriguing, as it comes out in between the broken remains of housing and piles of desecrated corpses. Law and Order has long since abandoned Lower Leyndell, yet still, we see the sap-lined doors down here. In fact, the lower city has the highest density of sealed buildings, as if the entire area was marked for quarantine, with no hope of being selective about which buildings to preserve. Whether the area went to hell in a handbasket before or after this, we can't know, but the piles of bodies speak for themselves, and they share a curious resemblance to the corpse piles inside the Dung Eater's room. The defilement process itself is a grisly and mysterious one, but something we do know is that it happens after death. Dung Eater defiles the corpse, not the living body. We also don't know the criteria for what makes a good corpse to defile, whether Dung Eater has killed many people only to not find them to be suitable hosts, or if he just doesn't have the time. It could be that the corpses in the lower city are a direct link back to the Dung Eater, or it could simply be a coincidence, just as the corpse pile in the Round Table Hold could be a coincidence as well. It does appear to me to be a result of the real structure bleeding through into the fake Round Table we use as our base of operations. If you've seen my Night Rain video, I talk about the idea that the Round Table Hold is an illusion, presenting a form that reflects the needs of the current moment, and once its purpose is fulfilled, the need for the mirage falls away. After all, when the Erd Tree burns, the Round Table Hold burns with it, yet Godfrey's castle remains completely untouched. I find the desecration of Lower Leyndell combined with the Dung Eater's presence and the similarities between where we meet him to be related. But without hard evidence, it's hard to prove that it isn't just a coincidence. When the sun comes out, ice cream sales go up, but the sun isn't the one selling ice creams, etc, etc. There are a lot of reasons why Lower Leyndell is in its current state, which could be ascribed to more than just the Dung Eater. Earlier, I talked about the possibility of those who live in death being the reason for the sap, as we can find Leyndell's body after he lay with fear, and they could have just as easily played a part in Lower Leyndell's dishevelled state, as could the Albinaurics, or the hand monsters, or the ulcerated tree spirit. But there is one more clue that makes me believe it is at least connected to the Dung Eater. Just outside the church with Leyndell's corpse is an Omen Killer, the only Golden Order aligned enemy we can find in the lower city. Omen Killers are brutal, efficient agents of terror themselves, equipped specifically to scare and dispatch the Omen wherever they are found. They also happen to be perfumers who drink a concoction that removes their emotion, so they can perform their task without their conscience getting in the way. Remember when I called the Dung Eater a terrorist, and that the authorities react to terror quite forcefully? Well, the Omen Killers represent one facet of this response. They were acting long before the Dung Eater was around, as we know the Omen are an ancient thing, and the informal order of Omen Killers emerged as a way of culling undesirable cursed offspring, in a way that they perceived as some twisted form of mercy. We can find these enemies scattered around the world in some strange places. One thing about enemies in Souls games is that they often seem quite divorced from their environments at first, until you read into context clues and put together the pieces to make it make sense. We can find an Omen Killer at the village of the Albinaurics in Leyndell, quite out of place given the lack of Omen enemies, but given the Golden Order sees Albinaurics as mockeries of life, it makes sense to dispatch a butcher with experience in slaughtering those who don't fit the Order's rigid vision. When we examine the arena, it is littered with corpses in a manner similar to Lower Leyndell. This implies the scope of the Omen Killers has grown over time from Omen butchers to more like bounty hunters for all things the Order deems offensive. They are willing to go to great lengths to eradicate anything counter to the Order, and with their emotions dulled, the Omen Killers can enact this duty without hesitation. This is when we get to an important distinction. When I say that the Dung Eater is responsible for the state of Lower Leyndell, I don't mean he physically did all of the murdering. Rather than the Dung Eater being the one to cause the Great Corpse Mound in Lower Leyndell, it could just as easily be the Golden Order's fear of what he has done, and what he is capable of, that caused the Omen Killers to descend on Lower Leyndell, sealing the buildings forever, and dispatching everyone alive for fear of their corruption. I believe it is far more likely the Golden Order is the one that ruined Lower Leyndell, not the Dung Eater. In fact, I'm not even sure the Order is really aware of the Dung Eater necessarily. He is canonically dead, and was given grace some time before the events of the game. With society collapsing all around it, the Golden Order has other fish to fry. Because the seedbed curse is directly tied to Omen births, it is possible they believe there is some kind of Omen incursion spreading from the sewers, which is why they would send Omen Killers to the lower city. The Dung Eater's identity may in fact just be a complete mystery to the Order, or as of yet unconnected to the spread of the seedbed curse, prompting the overreaction we see. This is why we don't see the seedbed curse ritual performed in the sewers except on the Dung Eater's own corpse. Why we don't see the place infested with those who live in death. The sewers are the domain of the Omen. So you may be wondering, if this is all true, why tree sap? Why would the Golden Order go to so much trouble to use this sacred divine resource against the rumour of a returning Omen threat? Didn't I say that the tree hasn't produced tree sap for eons now? I've already covered some uses of tree sap earlier, but it's something of a wonder resource capable of doing all sorts of things. Its properties are versatile, able to harden into amber over time, and is readily available in one form or another in most parts of the real world. Naturally, this means it has a large footprint in our own history too, with the modern day word electricity actually tracing its roots back to the Greek word for amber, electron. This is in part due to the fact that amber has been observed to hold a low static charge, with the name electron meaning something along the lines of solid sunlight. Literally, crystallized droplets of sunlight. The ancient world largely saw amber as something beautiful, possessing a healing aura that was meant to ward off anything from common colds to curses, which ties in neatly with the Blessed Dew talisman's health regeneration effect. In fact, a lot of the historical context for amber lines up well with Elden Ring, where the Erd Tree has largely taken the role of the sun, its sap having once literally graced the lands between, the way the ancient Greeks believed amber to have come from the sun. In order to ward off a curse that threatens the very reproductive mechanism of your society, what better thing to use than the sacred medicinal sap that promotes life and vitality? Erd Tree sap must be especially potent to have brought the Age of Plenty and still have lingering effects today. As the sap hardens around the frame of a window, it seals the environment from the effects of the Omen curse, in effect hermetically warding it away. Real tree sap comes with a number of health benefits too, though it's difficult to find a reliable source on the more scientific medicinal benefits of tree sap, as it overlaps a lot with the quack science crowd that believe in auras, but maybe that's the point. After all, we know the Erd Tree is powerful, but over time, once the bounty dried up, became an object of faith, and society's belief that it contains the power to ward off the Omen curse is arguably more important than any proven ability to do so. We have to remember that the Golden Order is a faith-based theocratic society, so logic doesn't always factor into things, especially not for people at the lower levels. Our own history is full of much stranger remedies for curing ailments and curses that we know today don't work, but the placebo effect is nonetheless a powerful thing. If there's one thing I want this video to establish, it's that people, cultures, civilizations are all prone to believing in things that are convenient, because reality is terrifying and baffling. It would be easy for me to argue that the Dung Eater literally performed a curse in every single sealed building, that he literally killed everyone in Lower Leyndell, that the Golden Order is using ancient healing Erd Tree magic to cleanse these locations, but that just wouldn't strictly be accurate. As with a lot of Elden Ring lore, I think the lines between reality and belief are blurred. It is fear, a lack of organisation, and the threat of an existential disease that has driven the local authorities to take extreme measures, regardless of whether they are effective, even slaughtering whole populations for the simple thought that they could harbour a new Omen curse, making buildings unusable for the simple reason someone might use them for another curse ritual. And all of it works in the Dung Eater's favour. The Golden Order is so busy cutting its own nose off only to spite its face, letting the Dung Eater operate unrestrained. So, if this is plausible, then we really have to answer the big question. Where does all the tree sap come from? After all, the theory cannot stand with the knowledge that the Erd Tree is dormant. So, how can there even be tree sap in the first place? Well, simple. There are plenty of minor Erd Trees throughout the lands between. Ceremonial staff depicting the Erd Tree in its historic radiance, wielded by avatars who protect the minor Erd Trees. The avatars, emerging in the wake of the Elden Ring's shattering, were determined to protect the withering Erd Tree's offspring. The minor Erd Trees are one of the consequences of the Erd Tree's own dying form, and while we can't precisely place where they appeared, everything indicates that they are a recent thing. With the Erd Tree waning, and the shattering having wrought so much destruction to the land, Marika's dogmatic dominance through a single central Erd Tree has fractured in the same manner as the Elden Ring. This sort of implies that the will of Marika and the Erd Tree are not aligned, if the Erd Tree can even be said to have a will to begin with. Marika used the Erd Tree as her symbol, her seat of power, the image of her divine right, and if we believe the Divine Tower Tree theory, that each Divine Tower was meant to be an Erd Tree brace like we see in Night Rain, she stifled the growth of secondary trees that could threaten her own. But trees don't work like that. Death, decay, burning, and regrowth are all part of the natural life cycle of the forest, and trees need to die to bring out the next generation. This is why we find golden seeds. The Erd Tree knew its end was coming during the shattering, that no matter who won, it needed a contingency, so it fired off its kids like a blunderbuss, hoping that some of them would find somewhere to grow. And it worked, and a whole ecosystem of Erd Tree avatars and guardians grew up to protect the fledgling trees. These minor Erd Trees, born in the wake of the shattering, would be the source of the sap that has not been seen in ages. They are young, and whilst not overflowing with bounty, are physical and whole, unlike the illusory tree, which should be enough to extract some tree sap from. Sap is the blood of trees, and being young and vital, they could feasibly produce a special Erd Tree sap, an ancient substance long thought lost, returning to the lands between in its dying days as one cycle ends only to begin anew. In ancient days, the Erd Tree sap was plentiful and used in jewellery, but in modern times the need is far more serious. There is no time for luxuries, only patching over new wounds. Much earlier in the video, I mentioned kintsugi and the gargoyles, with the corpse wax glue mending their stone bodies sort of mirrored in the sap sealing the doors and windows closed. But this time, the romantic, heroic element has been stripped away. It's funny with From Software games. Everything always comes back to blood. What terrifies the Golden Order most about the Omen is not just their appearance, but how they are symbolic of a defect in the cycle of rebirth. Throughout the Lands Between's catacombs, we can witness Erd Tree burial, the process of reuptaking corpses through the Erd Tree's roots. We can surmise that part of the vitality that goes into the Erd Tree sap comes from these very same corpses. The Dung Eater would spread the seedbed curse, using tainted blood to rewrite Erd Tree burial into producing only Omen. It is, in many ways, a conflict of blood. The sealed doors of Leyndell are literally smeared with the blood of past generations, hardened into the sacred amber of the Erd Tree, warding away the seedbed curse that would corrupt the bloodline of those cursed corpses that receive an Erd Tree burial. Elden Ring is pretty much the culmination of an entire era of From Software game making, and cursed blood seems to be one of their favourite things. The old blood, the dark soul, the headless, and the countless corruptions of blood in Elden Ring. But perhaps corruption is the wrong word. The Dung Eater may call the seedbed curse a curse, but he sees it as a blessing. Shadow of the Erd Tree flipped our understanding of what being an omen means. The script is flipped in the Land of Shadow. It is the Shadow Tree that casts a menacing shadow, looming over the once great civilization of the Hornsent, the very beings the Golden Order put to the sword for defying the neat little boxes it so loved to create. How can the Hornsent be cursed when what they can build can surpass Erd Tree society? It's a matter of perspective. The Hornsent are blessed with the life of the Crucible and its overflowing bounty in a way similar to how the Omen are cursed with their horned forms. However, there are some things about the Omen that we don't see in the Hornsent, something that makes their curse seem different. Their curse comes with dark magics the Hornsent don't appear to be associated with, and the face they see in the dark is also not referenced by the Hornsent. But I think a lot of that came about because of the Erd Tree Society's poor treatment of them. Something we can observe in our own world is just how much environment and access to resources can completely change a population. A racist points to another culture as inferior to their own because they are different. It is easier than accepting that they have a different background that doesn't offer the same opportunities to flourish, ignoring the moments in history when the relationship was the other way around. The Golden Order follows a similar logic with the Omen, albeit with the caveat that there may indeed be something different about the Omen compared to the Hornsent. But what could have brought about this difference? Injustice. Something horribly fascinating about human psychology is how quick we can be to look for scapegoats. I mentioned the bubonic plague earlier as a parallel to the sealed doors, but the plague outbreaks also brought with them new waves of persecutions. A number of minority groups in Europe were targeted after the plague, often for no reason other than they were different. People with skin conditions as minor as acne were attacked and killed for fear of harbouring more plague, and many ethnic populations were driven out of parts of Europe. Notably, Jewish communities were often accused of poisoning wells, and the majority Christian people were not very keen to hear how actually the Jews had suffered just as much, if not worse, from the plague. Angry people, having lost so much, had already made up their minds, and they needed someone to blame. Even in our modern day, the pandemic and ensuing lockdown in 2020 saw a significant uptick of violent crimes perpetrated against Asian Americans in the United States. With a surface-level understanding that the virus came from China, anyone who could be identified as looking vaguely Chinese was potentially the target of a silent inquisition, no matter where they were actually born or if they had ever been to China in the first place. Of course, this was all wrong, but it is sadly relevant as it shows just how easily we can fall into patterns of us versus them thinking, basing judgments on surface characteristics while ignoring all of the context. Now, perhaps I am romanticizing this a little, but Elden Ring shows there were many parallels between the Golden Order and the Hornsent. It was the Hornsent who committed atrocities by creating the Jar People, by stuffing shamans into pots, causing the jars to forever subsist on the corpses of the dead to replenish their contents. Now, why does that sound similar to the Omen Curse? Fear, superstition, and paranoia. It is how we treat people that turns them into what they are. Shun and revile them, and they will turn into your worst fears. The Hornsent found out the hard way when Marika came back to destroy them, and the Golden Order can find out the hard way if you go with the Dung Eater's ending. Erdtree Burial, the enduring mechanism of rebirth, will be altered to bring about an Age of Omen, returning life back to a less controlled, more chaotic, more vital time. All because Order chafed against what it saw as a corruption to eradicate. I do not sympathise with the Dung Eater, but if you see it through the eyes of the waning, collapsing Golden Order, led in secret by an Omen King who wished to have never been an Omen, you can kind of understand the fear at the spread of this Omen Curse and the measures that they might go to stop this curse, or blessing, from spreading. A quiet, unacknowledged cold conflict fought in the streets of Leyndell between a man who wishes he were an Omen and an Omen who wishes he were not. Now, none of this is to say that my theory is perfect. Much of what I have said is built upon some heavy conjecture, and much of it is based on analysing the psychology of a society very far removed from our own. Some things also don't add up, like why some sealed doors are buried in ash piles, or why the lower city would be painstakingly sealed if it is still accessible by a lift. I think it's worth acknowledging that there are holes, because I really want you to pick at them, see if this theory is worth any merit. Ultimately, I just wanted to shed some light on a mystery that's been bothering me for the past 4 years, one that's often just been sort of offhandedly taken for granted, and really look at what could be the cause behind a mystery that has been boggling me for such a long time. Why Leyndell's doors would be sealed up. No matter what, I hope I've stoked your curiosity, and the next time you're in Leyndell, take a moment to appreciate the doors.
Hello? Hello? There you are, traveller. You bring news? So, that's what's past these doors. Well, that may be, but a true knight of Katarina doesn't balk in the face of danger. give me one moment to... oh! What's this? I do believe these portals weren't here before. Well, as much as I'd love to stay and chat, it seems I'm called elsewhere. Yes, you've been spared my wrath, Dung-Eater. But which one do I choose?